It was a cold night in early March, a couple of years back. I had just returned home from work. I had stayed late at work that evening, so it was nearly midnight when I finally stepped through the door. I was completely drained. All I wanted was to open an ice-cold beer and stretch out on the couch. That's exactly what I did. A drink always feels more satisfying after a long, tiring day. I didn't even bother turning on the TV right away. I just sat there on the couch, eyes closed, feet propped up, trying to push away the constant thoughts about how overwhelming my life felt. I remember getting irritated while scrolling through channels because nothing seemed interesting. After a few more minutes of searching, I finally gave up and decided to sit quietly and enjoy my drink. Like everything else going on in my life, even a moment of silence felt impossible because less than 10 seconds later, every light in the house went out at once. That faint buzzing pop right before everything shuts down is a sound I absolutely hate. For some reason, our house had a habit of losing electricity from time to time. Now that I think about it, it still happens. Anyway, my first instinct was to step outside and check if the neighboring houses were affected too. I walked out and closed the door behind me, hoping to keep whatever warmth remained inside in case I couldn't get the power back on. It was late, but I noticed at least one house nearby still had lights on, which told me the issue was only with mine. I shut my eyes and took a deep breath, already knowing this problem would ruin whatever little comfort I had left for the night. I turned to go back inside, but when I tried the front door handle, it wouldn't move. I stopped, confused. I tried again and again, but it was clearly locked. I couldn't understand what was happening. I knocked hard and called out for my wife, thinking maybe she had woken up without me noticing. There was no response. I tried to look through the glass, but everything inside was completely dark. I ran around to the back of the house. That door was locked as well. Panic started to set in. My wife usually left doors unlocked, so it didn't make sense for the back door to be secured. I rushed to the side of the house to check the breaker, and then I suddenly stopped. My garden hose, which I clearly remembered coiling up, was lying across the grass beneath the breaker box. In that moment, everything clicked. Someone had deliberately cut the power. Without thinking, I ran to the nearest window and looked inside again. This time, I could see two beams of light moving quickly in the darkness, like people searching through my home. They were inside. I knew they were stealing our things. I felt a surge of anger. The audacity of someone doing this while I was actually there. I reached into my pocket to call the police, only to realize my phone was still on the couch. I cursed quietly and decided I would run to my neighbor's house to use his phone. As I started heading that way, a much worse thought hit me. My wife was still inside. She was probably asleep, completely defenseless against whoever had broken in. I couldn't leave her there, not even for a moment. I ran back to the house and quickly grabbed some small rocks from the yard. I began throwing them at our bedroom window, hoping to wake her. After the third rock, she opened the window. Before she could speak, I quietly explained what was happening and told her to hide in the closet. She disappeared immediately, without asking anything. I then ran to my neighbor's house and knocked urgently on the door. I explained everything as fast as I could and used his phone to call the police. I stood on his porch, hoping my wife would be safe. Eventually, the police arrived, and I rushed over to one of the officers, explaining the situation as clearly as I could. They entered the house, but it was already too late. The back door was open, and whoever had broken in had already escaped with more of our valuables than I could count. My wife was far more shaken than I was, which made sense, and when she told us what happened, I felt angry at myself for not protecting her better. Even now, I still struggle to forgive myself for leaving her inside with people who could have killed her. She said that just seconds after I told her to hide, she heard someone kick open the bedroom door. The person stepped in and cocked a gun, then stood still for a few seconds, listening carefully for any movement. She told me she had never felt that kind of fear before in her life. I think they heard me throwing rocks at the window. The most unsettling part is that we still live in the same house, and we have no plans to leave anytime soon. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I hadn't stepped outside, even for those few minutes. I've always felt like I've been living in the shadow of my older brother. I don't resent it, but it has simply been the reality. He runs a successful business, and I've spent nearly 6 years trying to build something similar for myself. Recently, I moved back in with my parents to try to get back on track. Returning home felt like a step backward, but I didn't have many other options. I stayed in the basement so I wouldn't be in their way too much. Honestly, it wasn't that bad down there. It almost felt like a small apartment. The basement had its own kitchen, bathroom, office, bedroom, and even a TV with my old video games. Because of that, I hardly ever went upstairs. I could basically live down there on my own, and it helped me avoid feeling like a complete burden. One night, I think it was either Friday or Saturday, there was a really intense storm raging outside. Rain was pounding against the windows, and the wind was strong enough to shake the entire house. I can't fully describe just how powerful it felt. It was easily one of the most intense storms I had experienced up to that point. My parents were away for the weekend, so I had the house to myself, which I didn't mind at all. I remember it feeling especially cozy down there that night. I've always liked listening to a storm while lying in a warm bed, especially late at night. There is something about being safe inside while chaos unfolds outside that relaxes me. I was just about to fall asleep to the steady sound of rain when suddenly the power went out. Everything shut off instantly, and I was left in complete darkness. I let out a groan, annoyed by the situation. I assumed the storm had caused it, and for a moment I considered checking the breaker, but I didn't feel like dealing with that. Not with the storm going so strong outside. Plus, I was about to sleep anyway, and I didn't even know where the breaker was. I decided I would just wait it out and handle it in the morning. As I lay there trying to settle back in, I heard something. A loud, unnatural thump against one of the basement windows. It sounded heavy, like something had struck it with force. At first, I thought maybe a branch had broken loose or a tree had fallen, but the sound was sharp and intentional, unlike anything I had heard before. As much as I didn't want to move, I couldn't ignore something like that. That was more serious than just losing power. Reluctantly, I got out of bed and grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to guide me toward the window. The basement was completely dark, and the only sounds were rain hitting the glass and distant thunder. I remember rubbing my eyes, trying to wake myself up. I held my phone up and looked through the window, and my heart nearly stopped. There was a man's face pressed against the glass, staring directly at me. His eyes were wide, his skin pale and soaked, and for a brief second we locked eyes. The moment he realized I saw him, he quickly moved away. I stumbled backward, almost dropping my phone in shock. I couldn't even process what I had just seen. My heart started pounding. I was struggling to breathe, but before I could even think it through, I heard something else. Footsteps. I listened carefully. The floor above me creaked softly. There were people inside the house. Between what I saw and what I was hearing, I felt like I was about to lose control. I was alone, and someone had broken in. On top of that, one of them clearly knew I was in the basement. My mind was racing, and I could barely think straight. Everything was happening so quickly, but I had no choice but to react. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but then I remembered the power outage had taken down the Wi-Fi, and there was no cell signal in the basement. I was stuck, completely cut off. I knew I couldn't just stay there and wait for whatever they were planning. I tried to calm myself and think. I couldn't let them wander around freely, but I also didn't want to face them directly. I was trapped in a situation with no good options. I decided I would try to quietly sneak upstairs, slip out the front door, and call the police once I got outside. It was the only plan I had. I moved as quietly as I could toward the basement stairs. I can still remember how terrified I felt in that moment. You never really know how you'll react in a situation like that until it happens. When I reached the top, I carefully looked around the corner. My stomach dropped when I saw 3 figures moving through the dark house with flashlights. I watched them for a few seconds, completely frozen. One of the beams briefly lit up enough for me to see what one of them was holding. It was a gun. I didn't move. Every muscle in my body locked up. I just stood there. They spoke quietly to each other. Then I heard something that made everything even worse. In a calm, almost casual tone, one of them said, "Alex is in the basement. Go get him." I can't even describe the fear I felt at that moment. How did he know my name? I slowly backed down the stairs, trying to stay silent and control my breathing. Inside, I was completely panicking. I knew I didn't have much time. They were coming, and I had no idea what they would do when they found me. I looked around desperately, thinking of places to hide. There was no time for that. I needed to get out immediately, or I wasn't going to survive. The only escape was through one of the basement windows, but they were sealed shut from the inside. I had no other option. I grabbed a stool, climbed up into the window well, and smashed the glass with my elbow. Glass shattered everywhere, but I didn't care. I forced my way through the broken window and pulled myself outside into the rain. I could feel cuts all over me, but the adrenaline kept me from noticing the pain. The rain soaked me instantly as I ran through the mud, trying not to fall. Once I got far enough away, I finally had signal and called the police. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. By the time the police arrived and searched the house, whoever had been there was gone. A lot of things were stolen, too many to even list. The power outage had clearly been planned. My parents were furious and even threatened to kick me out. I had to beg them not to, telling them there was nothing more I could have done. Eventually, they calmed down, but I'm still shaken by everything that happened. I still don't know who those people were or how they knew my name. I try not to think about what might have happened if they had found me. I live in a calm suburban neighborhood, though several more crowded towns are just a short drive away. A few months back, I started working night shifts as a security guard at a warehouse located a couple of towns over. It sat in a massive industrial area that seemed to go on endlessly. The building itself was pretty isolated, filled with long rows of towering metal shelves and a few large loading docks. The job itself was simple. I did routine patrols, basic security checks, and made sure everything stayed locked and secure. Most nights were quiet, sometimes too quiet, but I did not really mind. I actually enjoyed being alone, and usually my shift would pass without anything unusual happening. One Thursday night, it was raining heavily. I kept checking my phone for weather updates because I was not looking forward to driving home in that storm. Thankfully, there was not much work to do that night, so at least that part was easy. The warehouse lights flickered a few times, but stayed on, so I did not think much of it. About an hour later, though, the power completely shut off, leaving the entire place in total darkness. That really annoyed me. I was the only worker on site, so fixing the issue fell on me. I had been trained for situations like this, but I never expected to actually deal with one. I stepped out of my small security office and started handling the situation. The instructions were to unplug some of the large machines before checking the breakers, so I began doing that. My flashlight was the only light in the building, which made everything feel extremely unsettling. The silence felt heavier in the dark, and every sound in the building seemed louder without the hum of electricity. Even my footsteps echoed far more than usual, which felt strange. While walking through one aisle, I suddenly heard a loud metallic noise coming from deeper inside the warehouse. It startled me, but I tried to brush it off as the storm shaking the roof or rattling the metal structures. Still, I decided to check it out aisle by aisle. When I turned one corner, I stopped cold. Ahead of me, I saw a faint light moving along the shelves. It looked just like another flashlight. It disappeared almost instantly, but I knew I had seen it. No one else was supposed to be there until morning. My heart started racing. Why would anyone else be inside? I thought about calling out, but chose not to. When I reached the area where I saw the light, nothing was there. The aisle was completely empty, just shelves and crates stacked high. I started to panic, certain I had not imagined it. Even so, I still had responsibilities. I considered calling the police, but I was unsure if what I saw was enough to justify it. Maybe there was a small chance I had imagined it. Looking back, if I had not been given a taser by the company, I probably would have called immediately. As I continued checking the building, I noticed a strange smell. It was a damp metallic scent, like rust or standing water. It seemed to be coming from one of the loading areas, a darker section where crates were stacked from floor to ceiling. I followed the smell with my flashlight, and then noticed something unusual. The beam reflected off the concrete floor and revealed two sets of wet footprints leading into a storage aisle. At that moment, I wanted to turn around and call the police, but I held off. If someone was inside, it was my responsibility to deal with it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the footprints. I kept my flashlight pointed low, so I would not reveal my position. As I moved closer, I began to hear faint whispering. It sounded like two people talking quietly a few aisles away. I could not understand what they were saying, but the tone felt tense and urgent. I switched off my flashlight and stayed still, trying to remain silent. Holding my taser tightly, I crept toward the sound. When I turned the corner and raised my flashlight, there was no one there. The whispering had stopped completely. They had been right there moments before. I could not understand how they disappeared so quickly. The whole situation shook me. I decided I was not paid enough for this, and chose to head straight for the circuit room to restore power without worrying about anything else. I reached the room and started working on the breakers in the dark. While doing that, I heard something scrape across the floor nearby. I turned my flashlight and saw a metal tool lying a few feet away. It was a crowbar, and it had not been there earlier. At that point, things felt serious. Whoever was inside could have bad intentions. I shouted that I was armed, which was only partly true because of the taser. I knew I needed to get out quickly. My nerves were completely shaken, but I knew my safety mattered more than anything else. As I moved toward the exit, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the building, followed by fast footsteps. Adrenaline kicked in, and I started running. When I turned a corner, I saw them. Two people dressed entirely in black were standing in the aisle. One of them held a crowbar, just like the one I had seen. They looked at me briefly, then suddenly charged straight toward me. I did not hesitate. I turned and ran. All my confidence disappeared instantly. I could hear their footsteps chasing me, but I refused to look back. I moved through the aisles as fast as I could, hoping I knew the layout better than they did. After what felt like forever, the footsteps stopped. I slowed down, catching my breath, and realized they were no longer following me. Eventually, I made it to the exit and got outside. I called the police right away and asked them to come quickly. They arrived sooner than I expected, which was a relief. The two people were gone by then, but the officers were helpful and even assisted in restoring the power. My boss, however, was not very understanding. He criticized me for running, and I nearly lost my job over the situation. I still cannot fully process how strange that night was. It was obvious those people were deliberately messing with me, yet they still chased me while carrying a weapon. The worst part is that I still work night shifts at that same warehouse, though now there are at least 2 guards on duty each night. I still do not know what to make of everything that happened. I am just thankful they did not catch me.